The insult didn't whisper through the cabin. It smiled. "Enjoy your luxury meal, sir." Her voice dripped with sweetness so artificial it stung more than venom. The blonde flight attendant leaned in too close, her grin stretched wide enough for the entire business-class cabin to see. On the plate, she slid toward him 2 slices of bread spotted with green mold, presented like a 5-star entree. For a second, the cabin noise softened. You could hear the hum of the engines, the clink of glasses, even the slight hitch in her breath as she waited for him to react. He didn't. Marcus Carter lifted his gaze, slowly measured, unbothered, the kind of calm that threatens more than anger ever could. His suit was pressed, navy and immaculate, his posture steady, his silence louder than any confrontation. Behind her, 2 other attendants watched with quiet approval, those tiny smirks people wear when they think they're untouchable. A couple of passengers glanced over, curious, confused, then looking away before guilt could settle in. But Marcus? He simply set his phone to his ear. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Marcus. The flight attendant straightened, still smiling. "Hope it's satisfactory," she said, tilting her head, watching him like he was entertainment, not a paying first-class passenger. Marcus didn't touch the food, didn't blink, didn't grant her the satisfaction of a flinch. Instead, he breathed once slow, deep, controlled. A man who had already lived this scene in different shapes, in different rooms, at different points in his life. A man who remembered being 22, denied a seat he paid for because he didn't look the part. A man who remembered being told he was too ambitious when he founded the aviation tech company that would change an entire industry. A man who no longer asked for respect, he expected it. He pressed the phone tighter to his ear. "Fire her. Now." His tone didn't rise. His expression didn't shift. But the air in the cabin did, tightening, trembling, as if the plane itself understood what those 3 words meant. Passengers looked up. The young junior flight attendant at the galley froze. The blonde attendant's smile faltered for the first time. Marcus kept his eyes forward, jaw steady, voice stone-cut. "She served me moldy food, and she enjoyed it." A pause. "Activate protocol. 7. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind before a storm breaks open. And in that moment, before anyone understood who he really was, the balance of the entire flight had already begun to shift. Marcus didn't touch the moldy meal. He didn't look at the attendant still hovering beside him, waiting for a reaction like it was part of her entertainment routine. Instead, he lowered the phone, set it gently on his thigh, and let the silence thicken around him. People always mistook that silence. They thought it meant submission. They thought he was confused, embarrassed, out of place. But his silence was the inhale before elevation. The cabin lights glowed soft gold, wrapping the business-class seats in a false sense of prestige. The leather looked expensive, the champagne cold, the napkins embroidered. But Marcus knew better. Luxury wasn't stitching. Luxury was respect. And respect was the one thing they hadn't given him since he stepped onto this plane. He remembered the way the attendant's eyes scanned him earlier. Plain suit, no flashy watch, no entourage. And the conclusion formed instantly behind her smile. He doesn't belong here. She didn't say it aloud. She didn't need to. Now, she stood a few feet away, whispering to a coworker. Their glances flicked toward him like sparks, quick, sharp, careless. The kind of glances people give when they think their target won't fight back. Across the aisle, a businessman pretended to read but kept peeking over the edge of his magazine. 2 rows back, a teen raised her phone halfway, unsure if this moment mattered enough to record. The junior flight attendant, the only one whose face held concern rather than judgment, remained frozen near the galley, hands clasped tight. Marcus breathed in. He'd built entire companies from the ground up, negotiated mergers that reshaped industries. Sat across from boardrooms that doubted him before learning who he was. He knew this pattern too well. The calm before the disrespect before the assumption before the erasure. Same script, different cabin. The engines hummed beneath the floor. A quiet reminder that they were thousands of feet above the world, and yet, somehow, the ugliest parts of the world had still found their way on board. Marcus finally lifted the moldy bread with 2 fingers, studied it under the cabin lights, then set it back on the plate with surgical precision. Not anger. Assessment. Because he wasn't thinking about the insult. He was thinking about the system that allowed it, and the system he owned a part of. He leaned back in his seat, eyes settling into that still, controlled focus that only appears right before someone powerful decides they've had enough. The plane was still climbing. But Marcus Carter? He was already rising higher. The disrespect didn't arrive all at once. It leaked into the cabin, quiet, steady, deliberate. The blonde attendant reappeared moments later, her posture sharpened by irritation she didn't bother hiding. She didn't look at Marcus so much as through him, like he was an obstacle she'd been forced to step around. "Sir," she said, voice clipped, "I'm going to need to verify your meal request. We don't usually serve special accommodations without notice." Airy. She let the word special linger, as if mold was a preference he had ordered. Marcus stayed still. A second attendant, tall, smug, arms crossed, leaned against the galley wall and added, "If you needed the economy menu, you could have asked. No judgment." But his tone carried nothing but judgment. A few passengers glanced up again. This time, they didn't look away as quickly. The blonde attendant reached for his tray without permission, her fingers brushing too close to his hand. "Let me take this back," she said. More a command than an offer. Before she could lift it, a soft voice cut in. Actually." The junior flight attendant stepped forward, her badge slightly crooked, eyes wide but determined. "I think the meal code on his ticket was correct, and he's listed as a priority passenger." The blonde attendant turned, smile evaporating. "Sweetheart, you're new. You don't understand how these situations go." 1740. I understand enough," the junior replied, voice shaking. He didn't get what he was supposed to. A thin thread of tension sliced through the cabin. The tall attendant scoffed. "Let management handle this, not trainees." But the damage was already done. Passengers now watched openly. Whispers floated. "What's going on? Did they really serve him that? Is this discrimination?" Marcus heard every word. He didn't need their sympathy. He needed their sight. And now, they were finally seeing. The blonde attendant leaned in again, too close, too bright, too fake. "Sir, if there's a misunderstanding, it's because you booked the wrong class of service." Her voice dipped lower. "These seats are for premium clients who meet certain standards." Certain standards. There it was. The truth behind the smile. Marcus didn't react, not outwardly. Inside, the decision was already made. The cabin had shifted. The balance had shifted. And what came next would shift far more. Because they weren't just disrespecting a passenger. They were provoking the man who helped build the skies they worked in. The first crack in the facade came quietly. The junior flight attendant, small frame, steady eyes, didn't move at first. She stood near the service station, clutching a tablet to her chest like a shield. But her breathing had changed. Shallow, uneven, fighting between fear and conscience. Marcus saw it. So did the passengers, now turning in their seats, sensing the storm tightening around row 2. The blonde attendant stepped closer to Marcus, voice dipped into condescension disguised as professionalism. "Let's not make this bigger than it is," she murmured. "We have VIPs on board who actually need attention." Actually, there it was again. She lifted the moldy tray with the tips of her fingers as if his presence were something contaminating. But before she could turn away, the junior attendant finally spoke. "Stop." The word wasn't loud, but it sliced clean through the cabin. Every head turned. The blonde attendant looked back, startled, as if the trainee had broken some unspoken hierarchy. "What did you say?" The junior swallowed hard but didn't back down. "I said, stop. He is a VIP passenger. I checked the system twice before boarding. He's listed under Priority 1 clearance." A ripple ran through the cabin, whispers, shifting bodies, raised brows. The tall attendant laughed under his breath. "Priority 1? For him? You must have read it wrong." "I didn't." 8. Her voice rose, not angry, just honest. "And the meal he received isn't even on today's service list. Someone swapped it." The blonde attendant's smile faltered for the second time today. That's a serious accusation for someone who still hasn't finished training. It's not an accusation, the junior replied. It's a fact. Passengers stared now, not at Marcus, but at them. At the imbalance. At the pattern. At the ugliness unfolding in real time. A woman across the aisle lifted her phone fully this time, recording without hesitation. "This doesn't look right," she whispered to her husband. Marcus remained still, hands folded, expression unreadable. A man who understood that sometimes the most powerful move is to let truth reveal itself through others. The blonde attendant tried to regain control. "Sweetheart, this is above your pay grade." But the junior shook her head. "No, this is about integrity. By doesn't turny men." Her tablet shook slightly in her hands, but her voice didn't. "You don't get to erase his status because you don't think he looks like he belongs." Silence, heavy, damning, fell across the cabin. And for the first time since takeoff, the power in the room shifted away from those who thought they held it, toward the man they underestimated, and toward the witness who refused to stay silent. The breaking point didn't arrive with shouting. It arrived with a touch. A small, sharp, unnecessary touch. The blonde attendant's fingers tapping Marcus's shoulder as she leaned over him, her voice dipped into syrupy authority. "Sir, I'm going to need that tray now. We can't have issues in premium seating. Issues. As if he were a problem to manage, not a passenger to serve." The moment her hand made contact, a ripple moved through the cabin, small but unmistakable. Phones lifted higher. Whispering stopped. Eyes widened. Even the engines seemed to dull beneath the weight of the moment. Marcus didn't move. Didn't flinch. But something inside him shifted. A memory, sharp, unwelcome, rose like a bruise pressed too hard. He was 19 again, boarding a regional flight home after finals week. He'd saved 3 months to buy that ticket, his first seat in business class. He remembered the excitement in his chest, the nervous pride in his posture. Until a flight attendant, different face, same smile, looked him up and down and said, "This section is reserved. Coach is that way." He'd shown his ticket. She'd called security anyway. Passengers had stared as if he were trespassing in his own dream. He slept on the airport floor that night. The humiliation never left. It matured. Now, decades later, the same tone, the same assumption, the same erasure stood inches from him, painted in better makeup, wrapped in a uniform, but just as poisonous. Back in the present, the attendant's smile sharpened. "You people always try to upgrade yourselves into seats you didn't pay for. It's policy." Those words detonated quietly across the cabin. A businessman lowered his magazine. A mother hugged her child's arm closer. The junior attendant's mouth fell open. "Ma'am," she whispered, "you can't say—" "I can say what needs to be said," the blonde snapped. "And what needs to be said is that he doesn't belong here." The junior stepped forward, body trembling but brave. "That's not true. He has a verified—" "Enough!" The tall attendant cut her off, voice rising. "Security can deal with this when we land. Let's not waste time." Security. For a meal, they sabotaged. For a seat he paid for. For an image they couldn't reconcile with their own bias. Marcus inhaled once slow, steady, the calm of someone who has been here too many times and refuses to let the past repeat unchecked. He set the tray aside, folded his hands, and lifted his eyes to meet hers fully. The cabin tightened. A storm about to break. A man about to rise. Because this wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was history repeating itself, and this time he wasn't 19. He was Marcus Carter, and they had gone too far. The cabin had become a stage, and every breath felt amplified. The blonde attendant stood planted in the aisle, arms crossed, confidence cracking but not yet shattered. The tall attendant hovered behind her, emboldened by the chaos he helped create. Passengers watched openly now, phones raised, eyes fixed, waiting for the next tremor. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He raised his phone. One tap. One call. "Rachel," he said quietly, as if requesting a simple scheduling update. But the stillness in his tone made the junior attendant straighten, made the blonde attendant stiffen, made a businessman mutter, "Uh-oh." "Yes, sir," Rachel answered instantly, her voice crisp through his earpiece. "Log the incident," Marcus said. "Category: personnel misconduct. Flight number and timestamp. Add visual notes. The blonde attendant laughed thin, nervous. Sir, whatever you're trying to do. He held up a hand. Not to silence her, but to declare she no longer had the authority to interrupt. Activate Protocol 7. The words fell soft, but the impact hit hard. Rachel exhaled as if she'd been waiting for that command all along. Confirmed. Protocol 7 is live. I'm patching in compliance, operations, and board oversight. All streams recording. A few passengers gasped. The tall attendant's smirk vanished. The blonde tried to recover. You can't. You think calling customer service scares us? Marcus turned to her slowly, deliberately, his gaze steady enough to pin a man to truth. I didn't call customer service. He let that settle. Let understanding crawl across her face like shadow. From the galley, the junior attendant stepped closer, voice trembling. Protocol 7. That's executive level. Yes, Rachel said through the speaker, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. It's reserved for partners, board members, and owners. The cabin froze. The blonde attendant's throat bobbed. The tall attendant stepped back. The temperature of the air seemed to drop 5 degrees. Marcus spoke again, still calm, still controlled. Rachel, notify the airline's chief of staff that we have a live bias escalation in progress. Direct them to pull this crew's service history. Cross-check prior complaints. Highlight unresolved incidents. Rachel typed rapidly. Yes, sir. Already retrieving files. And Marcus Compliance flagged something. This isn't their first event. The blonde's face drained of color. Passengers leaned in, hungry for truth, hungry for justice. Marcus folded his hands in his lap, gaze unblinking. This ends today. No thunder in his voice. No anger. Just certainty. And in that certainty, the power in the cabin shifted. Away from those who believed they owned it, and toward the man who actually did. The cabin held its breath. Not metaphorically. Literally. A stillness pressed down on every row, tightening the air until even the hum of the engines felt muted. The blonde attendant whispered, Protocol 7. Owners? Her voice cracked on the last word. The tall attendant swallowed hard, suddenly unsure of where to place his hands, his authority, or his arrogance. Passengers leaned into the aisle, cameras lifted like a row of tiny witnesses ready to capture a reckoning. Marcus hadn't moved. Not an inch. He let the silence work. Let the truth hover, heavy and inevitable, just above their heads. Rachel's voice returned through his earpiece, steady, sharpened, carrying the weight of corporate machinery shifting into formation. Marcus, Compliance pulled the logs. 3 prior misconduct reports tied to this crew. 2 were labeled appearance-based judgment. 1 involved meal tampering. That word tampering rattled the cabin. The blonde attendant choked on a gasp. Marcus finally looked up at her, and for the first time since takeoff, he spoke with clarity meant not just for her, but for every soul within 10 rows. You served me moldy food, he said, tone level, unshaken. You mocked me. You questioned my right to sit in the seat I paid for. A pause measured. Cinematic. And you did all of that, on an airline I helped build. The cabin erupted not in noise, but in reaction. Eyes widened. Phones shot higher. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." A businessman muttered, "He's the Carter? That Carter?" The blonde attendant stepped back like she'd touched a live wire. This isn't possible. You're just what?" Marcus asked softly. The question didn't rise. It cut. He stood, not abruptly, but with the steady grace of someone who owned every inch of the floor beneath him. I'm Marcus Carter, founder of Aerotech Systems, 28% shareholder of this airline. The systems you rely on to confirm passenger status? He tapped his phone. I built them. A collective exhale swept through the cabin. Passengers weren't whispering anymore, they were choosing sides. And none of them were choosing hers. The blonde attendant staggered back another step, breath trembling. I didn't know. Marcus held her gaze with the calm of a man who had endured this scene too many times to count. That, he said, was the problem. A sentence so soft, so precise, the cabin felt it more than heard it. The reveal wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was absolute. The moment the truth settled, The cabin didn't explode. It imploded. Silent shock folded over itself, row by row, tightening the air until every person on board understood they were no longer watching a customer complaint. They were witnessing a reckoning. The blonde attendant's knees softened. The tall attendant shifted back, palms sweating, confidence draining like water through cracked glass. Passengers angled their phones, not out of curiosity now, but out of certainty. This mattered. Rachel's voice returned, crisp and merciless. Marcus, the board oversight team is online. They've reviewed the footage. Compliance has finished its initial assessment. They're requesting immediate crew suspension pending formal investigation. The blonde gasped. Suspension? You can't not without... Marcus didn't even turn her direction. Rachel, proceed. Confirmed. Submitting the directive now. A soft chime echoed from the galley station. Another from the handheld device clipped to the tall attendant's belt. Both screens flashed red. Access. Revoked crew status. Suspended. The blonde's breath hitched. No. This must be a system error. I've served this airline for 14 years. 14 years too long, someone whispered from row 4. A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. The tall attendant jabbed at his device, panicked. It locked me out. I can't access the service panel. 2. 5. With coming. Yes, Rachel said coolly through Marcus's earpiece. That's what suspension means. The junior flight attendant covered her mouth, eyes wide not from fear but awe. She had never seen power move so cleanly, so quietly. Marcus finally looked at the blonde attendant. Not unkindly, not triumphantly, just truthfully. You thought you had power, he said softly. You had permission. There's a difference. Her lips trembled. This isn't fair. Dakely. Marcus's brow lifted, subtle, surgical. Fair? He repeated. You used that word while serving me spoiled food, while questioning my place, while humiliating a paying customer in front of a cabin full of witnesses. He stepped closer, not aggressive, but undeniable. What's happening to you now isn't unfair. It's accountability. Passengers nodded. Someone whispered, finally. Rachel spoke again. Marcus, operations wants to reroute a supervisor to meet the plane at touchdown. They're asking if you'd like the crew escorted off. The blonde shook her head violently. No, please, don't. Marcus raised a hand, stopping Rachel mid-sentence. No escorts, he said. They'll walk off on their own. A beat, a shift, a lesson. Because humiliation had never been his goal. But clarity? That he delivered perfectly. The collapse had happened, but the aftershock was still spreading through the cabin, quiet, electric, unavoidable. The blonde attendant stood motionless near the galley, hands clasped so tightly the skin blanched. The tall attendant hovered behind her, eyes unfocused, realizing only now that arrogance had never been, armor just decoration. Passengers no longer hid their reactions. Some whispered, some nodded. Some simply stared at Marcus with the reverence reserved for someone who didn't shout to win, but shifted the entire room by standing still. The junior flight attendant stepped forward again, this time not trembling. Sir, she said softly, I'm sorry you were treated like that. You didn't deserve it. Marcus met her gaze. Calm. Grounded. You spoke up when you didn't have to, he replied. That's what integrity looks like. The words hit her harder than any reprimand she had ever received. Her shoulders straightened. Her breath steadied. For the first time since boarding, she belonged. Rachel's voice came through Marcus's earpiece once more, but gentler now. Marcus, the board wants to issue a formal statement after landing. They also want your recommendation regarding the junior attendant. He didn't hesitate. Promote her. A soft gasp escaped the junior's lips. The blonde attendant looked away, unable to witness a world she no longer had access to. The cabin shifted again, not with fear this time, but with recognition. People were seeing the difference between power used irresponsibly and power used right. Marcus exhaled, long and even. His pulse was steady, his posture unbroken. The engines began to soften as the plane prepared for descent. The captain's voice crackled overhead, attempting a neutral tone that couldn't hide what he now knew. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please remain seated. and thank you for your cooperation. But the cabin no longer belonged to routine. It belonged to the moment. A man across the aisle leaned in just enough to be heard. Sir, whatever happens next, thank you for standing up. People see it, more than you know. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply looked out the window as city lights rose to meet the plane. A quiet king returning to the ground, not triumphant, not vengeful, just resolute, because dignity wasn't something he demanded. It was something he restored, and the landing would bring clarity the way gravity always does, pulling truth down to earth, for everyone to face. The wheels hadn't even touched the runway when the cabin shifted again, not in tension this time, but in anticipation. A kind of quiet verdict floating in the recycled air. The plane rolled to a slow, deliberate taxi. Outside, blue beacons blinked across the tarmac like warning lights meant for someone else. Inside, the blonde attendant wiped her palms against her skirt. The tall attendant stood stiff as a statue, and the junior attendant hovered near Marcus, not for protection, but out of respect. The captain's voice cracked overhead, tighter than before. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Ground supervision will be boarding shortly. Passengers exchanged looks. They knew what that meant. The cabin door opened with a hiss. A woman in a charcoal suit stepped in, badge clipped to her belt, expression carved from corporate steel. This was not a flight attendant, not customer service, not a manager. This was operations. Mr. Carter, she said, spotting him immediately. I'm Supervisor Lang. We've received the escalation. The blonde attendant swallowed so loudly row 3 heard it. Supervisor Lang didn't look at her. Not yet. Mr. Carter, the board thanks you for your cooperation. We'll be conducting an immediate crew review before deplaning. May I proceed? Marcus nodded once. Permission granted. Lang turned to the aisle, voice firm, unwavering. Flight attendants Harris and Cole stepped forward. The blonde attendant, Harris, moved like her shoes were filled with sand. Cole followed, jaw clenched, arrogance drained. Passengers watched without blinking. Supervisor Lang continued. We have verified misconduct, meal tampering, passenger harassment, and violation of Priority 1 protocol. Effective immediately, your access credentials are revoked. You will deplane last and report directly to compliance. Harris's lip trembled. This isn't fair. Lang cut her off. What wasn't fair was your behavior toward a Priority 1 passenger and shareholder. Gasps rippled through the aisle. Harris looked at Marcus, eyes wet, desperate. Please, I didn't know who you were. Givenses. Marcus's tone was soft, almost gentle. That was exactly the problem. Cole lowered his head. Supervisor Lang finally turned to the junior attendant. And you, she said, will remain on board. The board has flagged you for exemplary conduct during a bias escalation. You'll receive formal notice tonight. The junior's eyes widened. Thank you, ma'am, Marcus added. She earned it. Lang nodded once agreement sealed. Passengers murmured, some proud, some stunned, all aware they had just witnessed something rare, power used responsibly. Supervisor Lang stepped aside. Mr. Carter, you may deplane whenever you're ready. The tarmac escort is waiting. But Marcus didn't move yet. He glanced at Harris and Cole, not cruelly, just with the clarity of someone who survived the system they thought protected them. Next time, he said quietly, lead with respect, not assumptions. If you wad, and with that, the cabin finally exhaled. Justice had boarded and finished its work. The cabin didn't return to normal. It couldn't. Not after what they'd seen. Not after what had been exposed quietly, cleanly, without a single raised voice. Supervisor Lang stepped aside, giving Marcus a clear path down the aisle. But he didn't stand yet. He knew the moment wasn't finished. Not for him, not for them. Row by row, passengers began to move, not physically, but emotionally. They straightened. They breathed deeper. They looked at him the way people look at someone who just changed something in the world, even if only within the walls of a plane. A man in a suit spoke first. Sir, what you did. Most people wouldn't have had the patience. He paused. Or the power. Thank you for using both. Marcus nodded once. A woman with a stroller leaned out into the aisle. I fly every week. I've seen things like this too many. but never the ending. Her voice cracked. Not until today. A teen near row 5 lifted her phone, recording herself but speaking to Marcus. This is what accountability looks like. People need to see this. The cabin murmured in agreement. Near the galley, Harris, the blonde attendant, stood pale and trembling. Cole stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. But what surprised everyone was what happened next. The junior attendant stepped forward, not toward Marcus this time, but toward them. Her voice didn't shake. You treated him like he didn't belong, she said to her colleagues. But he did everything you didn't. He stayed calm, he stayed respectful, and he let the truth speak. Harris opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The junior continued, And you embarrassed this airline, not him. Passengers nodded. Some even clapped softly applause, not of entertainment, but of recognition. A tide turning. Marcus finally rose. The aisle seemed to widen around him as he stepped forward. Not triumphantly, not vindictively, but with the steady dignity of someone who had carried this weight for decades and refused to let it bend him. As he approached the exit, a man in row 1 quietly said, You didn't just protect yourself. You protected the next person who looks like you. That line lingered in the air like a benediction. Marcus paused at the doorway, glanced back at the cabin. At the people who found their voice, at the witness who found her courage, at the crew who found consequences. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He simply said, Respect shouldn't require a reveal. And then he stepped onto the jet bridge, leaving the cabin changed. Not because he demanded justice, but because he embodied it. The jet bridge felt different beneath his feet. Not louder, not brighter, just honest. Outside, night air spilled through the open service door, cool and sharp, washing away the stale cabin tension that had clung to his suit. Marcus stepped forward, not rushing, not lingering. A man unweighted, but not untouched. 2 operations officers waited beside a black sedan, its engine running, headlights soft, not demanding attention. They straightened the moment they saw him. Mr. Carter, one of them said, Ground Ops has been fully briefed. The crew in question will be escorted through compliance after all passengers deplane. Your statement has already been forwarded to the board. Marcus nodded, a quiet acknowledgement. He didn't need follow-up. He didn't need reassurance. Justice already moved. As he approached the car, he caught a reflection in the tinted window. His own face. Calm. Still. Older than 19. Older than every moment he'd been pushed aside, doubted, mistaken for less. He opened the door but paused when footsteps echoed softly behind him. The junior flight attendant stood at the edge of the jet bridge, hands clasped, shoulders square, courage still glowing faintly around her like a halo. Sir, she said, voice steady now, I just wanted to say thank you. Not for what you did to them, but for what you showed all of us. Marcus turned to face her fully. Courage isn't loud, he said. It's choosing the truth when silence is easier. Her eyes glistened not from fear, but from clarity. She nodded once, deeply. You changed something tonight, she whispered. Marcus offered the faintest smile. I didn't change anything. I revealed it. He stepped into the car, the door closing with a muted thud. A punctuation mark, not an ending. The sedan pulled away from the gate, gliding across the tarmac as runway lights streaked by like falling stars. Marcus watched them pass, reflections rolling across the glass like memories he no longer owed anything to. The world outside was vast, open, waiting. But the final words belonged to him, soft enough to be personal, sharp enough to be truth. I didn't raise my voice, he murmured. I raised the standard. If wasn't 2020. And the night carried it forward. A quiet declaration from a man who didn't just survive the system. He rewired it.